We grew pot in our garden and smoked it.
I learned how to roll a joint in preschool. My mother thought it was cute, and then we got to roll her joints for her, and that was a lot of fun.
We moved to Virginia and lived on a commune for a year.
There were a lot of naked people around, but...
And I told my parents I didn't want to go to school, it wasn't fun anymore. They said, okay.
Many hippies were weekend hippies who wore the costume and then went back to work on Mondays. But a few hippies totally changed their lives and dropped out of normal society altogether. And then some of those hippies had kids. These kids were not hippies like their parents. They did not decide to drop out. They were born dropped out.
Health food really sucked.
I'm not interested in getting up at 5 in the morning and grinding wheat. He was toasting like kasha and then grinding it and making homemade cereals.
My dad was a lawyer, and my mom was a flight attendant before they became hippies.
When I was born, my father was 44, my mother was 19. And the story that she tells is that when I was an infant, she was holding me in the rocking chair and watching the Ed Sullivan Show and saw the Beatles, and suddenly got a clue that there was something going on out there that she wanted to be a part of. And she knew at that moment that she was going to leave my father and go participate in what was happening.
I really know nothing about my actual birth father.
The main catalyst for my parents to drop out, to quit their jobs, and to, in their case, leave the United States was the Vietnam War.
I was the only kid around, really. Most of the people I was hanging out with were somewhere between 19 to 25-year-old college students.
My parents left the U.S. when my mom was pregnant, and they had nothing but a backpack, so they were very poor. They probably weren't eating almost anything.
The kids ran around like crazy, and all the adults looked after them.
We moved all the time. We had tents, I guess. We lived in teepees in the summertime, and other people's houses in the wintertime and stuff.
My mom was a teacher. She'd been a school teacher for decades. I think she just realized that people learn at different paces and that I should just be able to take my time. And what they would just do would be read me these exciting, science fiction books or fantasy, and then they would maybe stop at like a really cliffhanger portion of the book, and then I would sort of pick it up. And, so that worked.
When I did enter school, I went into 3rd grade, and that was mostly terrible.
I did awful in public schools. The kids weren't nice to me at all. I was a really geeky, weird kid. But finally she realized that it wasn't going to work, and there was the opportunity to send us to a hippie school.
My math tutor was a total hippie.
They had this theory that the kids would learn math when they were ready, and I guess I never was ready. I don't fit in to the mainstream world. I've tried. There's a lot of families at my daughter's school that talking to them is sort of like it's apples and oranges. I have not the same reference point. It can be very lonely. It's really frustrating.
I guess I had this sense, and I still do, that I'm a traveler from another place, and I'm not really from this world, and I am now, of course.
For the last 8 years of my life, I've only been an artist, and that's been pretty fantastic. My parents must have instilled in me the belief that just because someone is an authority figure, they are not automatically right.
A lot of times what they were asking me to do wasn't the best thing to do. It wasn't the most compassionate thing to do, and it often was really not an intelligent thing to do. And I really started to feel like authority represented unintelligence.
I definitely don't have an ingrained respect for authority, and it's great, but it also gets me in trouble. My parents were so much exploring and trying to figure out who they were that there wasn't that sense of an omnipotent parent. There was nothing to rely on in a certain sense. And so I was very much on my own steam, which in some ways was wonderful and in some ways really, really hard. And not having someone to depend on is difficult. And I feel like there was, in some ways, I'm sure, very liberating, a different idea of parenting where the parents still got to be a person, not calling a parent mom or dad, but calling them by their first name and so on. But at the same time, you really need your parent to be the parent, and they were so self-involved, and I think that continues, actually.
Structure. There wasn't much.
We pretty much did what we wanted. We weren't bad kids. There was no crossing boundaries, so it really didn't come up very often.
I don't feel like I saw as much sex as the stereotype.
It was a great ideology for people that wanted to get laid a lot.
My parents really didn't participate much in the free love part of the hippie movement that I know of. My dad probably would have liked to have had a little bit more free love.
The thing I remember most, I guess, in the sense of free love is that everybody was naked all the time, and there was a sense of the body is beautiful, no reason to hide it, we can all be together and be naked, and it's not a problem.
Explained it to my kids that what pot does, it kind of makes you happy but stupid.
But I remember wishing that my dad did smoke marijuana rather than alcohol. For myself, I also didn't take drugs, maybe because of seeing my parents not do it, but...
Yeah, so I think my parents were really serious and engaged and really were trying to be part of something that would change the world, and it kind of fell apart for a lot of reasons. From violence, again, the assassinations and the war, and people were exhausted. The movement fractured, and there was a lot of infighting, and then I think a lot of it was this whole party mentality, and drugs, I think, took a huge toll, and I think my parents saw that.
I was probably in 7th grade, and I skipped school to go wait in line at a Jefferson Starship concert with friends, and I had promised my parents that I wouldn't do that. But of course I did, and they found out, and they snatched me out of line and threw me in the van and took me home, and my punishment was they took away all of my pot-smoking paraphernalia, and they took my Van Halen tickets away.
It's difficult to function in mainstream society. I don't have certain skills.
I guess I've sort of retraced my parents' steps in reverse. So they moved from the city to the country, and I've kind of made my way back.
Communication. That's been a huge issue for me. I mean, it's been very, very difficult because one of the things in a commune is it gives you a very unrealistic perspective of what people actually do in the world to communicate. At least in my household, we met once a week, and everybody talked about, what people needed, where the boundaries were, how everybody was trying to work around everybody's needs and accommodate everyone. And that's really not what happens in the real world.
think there's a huge misunderstanding of what that era involved.
I think that the term hippie is a misunderstanding by definition. But it's also become the sort of iconic thing that it was destined to become in that.
So I think there's a lot of things from that era that we would like to, that are painted now as if they were superficial. It was about fashion and drugs just to be out of it, and sex, crazy sex. That I'm sure was part of it, but I think there was also something about really exploring consciousness and responsibility.
Of course I would say no, but it's like I meet people who say, I was raised Catholic, but I'm not a Catholic, I go to church every Sunday, but I'm not a Catholic. Or it's a part of my culture, but I'm not really Jewish. So I guess I would answer the question in the same way, like, it's part of my culture, but I'm not a practicing hippie.
I don't think I'm a hippie now.
Yes, I would say I'm a hippie.
I guess I was a hippie, just because of the road my parents chose.
When I was 15 or whatever, certainly people would say I was a hippie with long hair, and they maybe still call me hippie. I have, like, earrings. I don't know if that's a hippie thing. I don't know.
I'm not a hippie, and I've never been a hippie. My parents will tell you that they were never hippies, but other people would say that they were hippies. I want to say that I'm proud of my parents for sticking it out as long as they did. They really did put in a lot of hard work to live the lifestyle that they chose, whether that was a hippie lifestyle or whether you might call it something else entirely. I don't know.